Hello, some of you might be aware, if you follow me at all, that the first two books in my Glen series are available on Audible. You can get them in lots of different forms if you have the membership, the Audible membership, or you can buy them outright in audiobook form. And they have this super sexy narrator with a Scottish accent. However, for book 3, I'm going to do something a little bit different. So this is book 3 of my Glen series. To Dance in the Glen and Lady of the Glen are available on Audible. But this is Exile of the Glen. And this story picks up where Alistair from the Lady of the Glen is banished. And so what we're going to do is we're going to hear his story. And I'm going to do a bit of a read aloud. Unfortunately, I don't have the super sexy Scottish accent. For that, you got to go listen to the first 2 books on Audible. I'm just going to read them to you like I'm doing a read along. And then as a fun little point of reference for the book cover here, this cover model is my nephew, CJ, so this book kind of holds a special place in my heart. All right, Chapter 1, A Long Cold Ride. The Minch, late fall, 1306. The coastline of western Scotland drifted away into the dusky horizon as the oarsmen worked the Berlin farther west towards the open waters of the Minch. Though the sky was cloudy and rain fell in a steady drizzle, the waters were thankfully calm. Light winds caught the sails, propelling the boat and easing the work of those on the oars. The mood aboard the sturdy wooden boat was energetic and jovial. At least that's how the scene appeared to Alistair, who was sat bound and freezing in a barreled alcove near the stern of the Berlin. After his wet ride to the port of Garlock with the McNallys, his plaid wrap was sopping wet. The chilled air of the Minch settled into the rough tartan and through Alistair's tunic, and he could not stop shivering. Every part of him shook with damp and cold. His clothes, his hair, his skin, his fingernails even. And he wondered if he would ever feel warm again. He flexed his bound hands to revive and warm them as best he could. The seaman handled the Berlin with ease, stepping easily over Alistair, ignoring him altogether. Most of the oarsmen abandoned their post as the boat caught full sail and smooth and clipped with the wind. The Minch at midday filled Alistair's view, seeming an endless gray sea against a lighter gray sky. The clouds swept over the water in shades of grays and whites, the overcast light reflecting on the iron-grained waves. He had never seen such a wide and expansive view and felt even smaller than he had when he boarded the boat. The panorama, the emptiness of the sea, so comfortable to the sailor, struck a wedge of fear in Alistair. Never more than knee-deep in a local loch, the vastness of the seas presented an unknown adventure he did not wish to embark upon. The seamen moved confidently, secure in their seaworthiness of their vessel, and Alistair marveled at them. How did they feel safe with nae solid ground under their feet? A crisp wind blew across the hull, flapping the sails and loose tarps. Alistair tucked himself tighter into the alcove near the barrels, trying to retain what body heat he could in the crisp air. He thought the chilly ride on horseback to the coast was long, but this trip on the Berlin lasted an eternity in comparison. Alistair shivered again. He rested his head against the damp wood of the boat and closed his eyes. Braced on both sides by barrels, the cutting wind did not reach him. Alistair warmed a bit in his hidey hole, out of range of sight of most of the seamen. His body shivered, but weakly, and he was slipping into a light doze when he heard several men at the stern chatting loudly, oblivious of the spray of the sea. "We have to deliver the ass to the MacDonald in the northwest. Just what we need after this late jaunt," one deep-throated man said. "Can ye nae deliver the lad to McRory instead? He's right in Lochmaddy. Then we find our whiskey and ride some women instead of having empty bellies and riding a horse," another man chimed in. "Aye, I agree, Archie," yet another man responded. "We did not have any obligation to the McNally. Hell, he does not want the lad as it is, exiling him like this. What did the lad do to deserve such banishment to the Hebrides? Might as well have killed the lad instead, save him the misery." Alistair's head hung at hearing the man's assessment. Had he known that the Isles were nothing more than the last bastions of civilization, a word that is nae taken lightly in the Isles. If he had accused the McCullochs of being wild men, they were courtly knights compared to the men of the Isles, if rumors were correct. And if the men elected to dump him with some clan other than his own, where would that leave him then? "Well, I didna care either way," the first man told the others. "I didna want to drag myself halfway across East just to deliver an unwanted man somewhere where he's no wanted. Your idea is sound, Archie. We'll drop him with the McRory and let them deal with the bastard." The deep-voiced man, obviously the leader of the Stahl troop, made the final decision. "This cannot get much worse," Alistair thought, aggrieved. "If I did not have bad luck, I would have no luck at all." The Berlin struggled over the rough, freezing waters of the Minch well into the night. While Alistair was unsure how long the ride would be, he was certain they would likely arrive sometime the next day. He needed to prepare himself for these unanticipated changes to this trip. The strange men wandered away, leaving Alistair to wallow in his own blistering cold misery. He shifted slightly, moving his head out from under the alcove to catch a view of the dark sky. A few glinty stars glimmered out from the patchy clouds. A pale moon strained to provide its muted luminescence, lighting the path over the water. The winds favored them, blowing continually throughout the evening, cutting through the fabric of Alistair's tartan. A flapping sound attracted his attention, and he found a scrap of tarp billowing near one barrel. As he tugged on it, the tattered tarp slipped free, and he wrapped the dense cloth around himself to fend off the cold air of the night. He huddled under the tarp as feeling began to return to his fingers and toes. Alistair felt small under the wide, dark sky, smaller than even when he was under the rage-filled scrutiny of his uncle. His thoughts drifted to the past few weeks, of how his life had changed so abruptly, so miserably. Just a few months ago, his future was secure, set to be a leader and husband, active in his clan, beloved by his family. Now here he sat, freezing on a flimsy vessel on the even colder Minch, and his future uncertain, any hope for leadership or wife gone, no clan, an embarrassment to his family. He did not want to imagine his father's reaction when he learned Alistair's fate. His mother would never forgive her brother, no matter how justified McDally was to demand his exile. Tears formed in the corners of his eyes, and he had to blink them back lest they find their way down his cheeks, most likely to freeze as they fell. The plan seemed sound. How did it all go so wrong? What happened to me to take it all so far? His stomach churned worryingly, and he had to swallow several times to stop the vomit from rising. Whether he was sick from the cold voyage on the sea or from the depths of his regret, he did not know. Regret is a painful awareness of a misguided reality. And under the shadowy skies on the small boat on the Minch, Alistair could do nothing but wallow in the regret that overwhelmed him. A part of him harbored hatred and anger over the loss of his position, his family, and life as he knew it. But the farther out to sea he traveled, the less space those emotions occupied. Instead, the weight of regret pushed those thoughts to the side. He had learned a hard lesson at the hands of his cousin Elaine and his uncle Laird McDally, and he hoped that in the future he would not act in such a rash, crazed manner as he had for the past month. He formed the idea into a prayer asking God for clarity and guidance, and sent the prayer up to the mysterious stars above him. Perchance this trip to the Isles could be an opportunity for a new life, a rebirth, to become the man he knew he could be, not the broken, disturbed man he left behind in the Highlands. Alistair blinked his eyes open to the incandescent glow of morning settling over the Minch. His tunic and trews had dried as he dozed under the tarp, so he felt moderately better and had stopped shivering. He folded the tarp to the side and lifted his hazy green eyes over the edge of the boat, trying to surmise their location. Some land masses in the distance seemed to surround the Berlin, and Alistair guessed they had entered the Little Minch that lapped at the shore of Northwest. Hopefully that meant they would be on land soon. A sailor he was not. Sunrise peeking through the clouds lighted the water in a reflective steel gray, a smoother journey now that they had left the more open water of the Minch. His stomach settled while he'd slept, and now grumbled loudly. Alistair adjusted himself between barrels, wondering if any food could be found on the boat. Surely dried mackerel or a herring? A dry bannock? He could not remember the last time he ate. His attention on his hunger was interrupted by two sailors who stomped down the hull of the Berlin, dragging a dense rough rope. They joked with each other as they worked. "Ugh, I'm glad that the blue men of the Minch did nae climb aboard yester eve," the second man laughed at his portly mate. "Christ's blood, Angus, are ye afeard of imaginary blue men? I would think ye abandoned childish fears afore ye climbed aboard a boat." "I dinna fear them," the man named Angus responded sheepishly, a rosy blush rising over the beard that covered his heavy cheeks. "And my brother told me his boat did encounter him last season. The blue men are real." The other sailor only laughed harder. "Ugh, ye are a weak-minded lad, Angus. There's no such thing as a blue man. Your brother didna see anything other than waves on the Minch." They worked the rope past Alistair, who popped his head out and called to them. Both sailors dropped the rope, their expressions altering from levity to seriousness. "What do you want, you rogue? You have a bold tongue on you to speak to us." The fellow named Angus spoke. "My apologies." Alistair tried to make himself appear as contrite as possible. "I have nae eaten in several days. Could you find a wee bannock?" His stomach growled as he spoke, confirming his request. The other man smirked at his situation. "Your uncle did not finance this trip for you to have luxuries," he scowled, but Angus elbowed him. They leaned their heads close to one another, speaking in low tones that Alistair could not hear over the crashing of the water against the hull of the boat. They returned their attention to Alistair. "Angus will find you a bannock." He pointed out that it would no do well to have you die of starvation in our care. The man looked over at Angus. Christ knows that this one here would die if he missed even one meal. Angus snorted in response. The other man disregarded Alistair, resuming his work with the rope, looping it so it rested on the stern ready for use. Angus disappeared to the far side of the vessel and reappeared with a lump of crusty brown bread in his hand. He held it out to Alistair in a large, grimy hand. "Are you in a bad way, eh?" Angus probed, looking for the details that Alistair was not prepared to give. He nodded vaguely, grasping at the bannock. His throat was parched, but Alistair still gobbled the dry bread, swallowing as fast as he could. He smacked his lips and tried to produce some saliva to wash down the cakey remains from his mouth. Aye, quite a bad way, Alistair finally managed. Did you really try to kill your cousin? Angus continued. Not exactly, Alistair responded, unable to look the man in the eye. 'Twas more like a misunderstanding. A large misunderstanding if you're now banished to the Isles. Was all Alistair responded, and Angus took the hint. Well, you're in for a change on the Isles. They're a tight-knit people, mostly all related, and they hate outsiders. Angus opened his mouth to speak again when the other man hollered for him to quit dawdling and get back to work. The heavy man lumbered away, leaving Alistair once more alone. Tell him ho! A voice near the bow carried through the sails and over the crashing waves. While land was visible to the west, since they had entered the little minch from Alistair's view when he peered over the edge of the boat again, the man's meant he could see the port of Lochmaddy proper. As they approached, the port, for what it was, became clearer. It was nothing more than a long wooden dock extending far over the shallow cargo fjord. The rocky shore itself appeared empty, not a croft or a keep nearby, nary a boat to be found. The tiny port stood out in stark relief, a mark of life in an uninhabited expanse of water and rock. Alistair's shoulders slumped. The distinct laugh of civilization meant more travel, and he was sick of this voyage. They sailed in a smooth motion to the dock, and the calm waters mirroring a bright autumn sky. Alistair had hoped the weather would hold if more travel was forthcoming. Noting the dusty trail leading from the docking up the hill to the west, Alistair studied the horizon, searching for a hint of his next destination. A strong clap against his backside sent Alistair stumbling over the side of the Glen. He would have ended up swimming in the shore had Angus's monstrous hand not grabbed his tunic in time and pulled him back on the deck, ripping the already threadbare material. All the strength left Alistair's body and he swooned. Angus held on to him, laughing. "Och, well, lad, you may have sea legs for certain." Angus shook Alistair as he laughed, and Alistair tried not to scowl in return. "You're no going to the MacDonald, at least no right away," Angus continued, hefting himself to the edge of the boat. "We need to attend the McCarty first. We will let him ken you are on his land, and then he'll decide when best you continue to the MacDonald. Let's get moving, aye?" Angus trained the other sailors to leap over the side of the boat as it purled alongside the dock. Thick ropes flung over the edges of the dock where the bulky men strained against the pressure of the boat as it rocked in the water. Bulging muscles flexed and shone with sweat as they looped the ropes over docking poles securing the vessel. The scarred wooden dock threatened to buckle under their thick feet. "Come, lad!" Angus hollered to Alistair. "Time to jump ship!" Sighing heavily, Alistair chanced one last look to the east, as though he could see the mainland Scotland from the far shore. Despair hung about him like a worn cape, and he stepped over the lip of the Berlin to his new homeland. All right, so that's chapter 1, and hopefully you'll look forward to chapter 2.